Real Estate Pro Talk is a live radio talk show dedicated to educating its listeners on the entire spectrum of real estate matters. Part of the American dream is owning a home or investment property, or perhaps even becoming a real estate agent yourself. Paul Vanas and his team of real estate professionals have over 250 combined years of experience in the industry. In other words, we can make it happen for you. Why go down the road less traveled when we can put you directly on the real estate superhighway? Whether buying or selling in today's complicated real estate market, or if you just need advice about jumping into the real estate business for a career change, you'll need a decisive edge based on experience. Call Paul Vanas at 401-265-6144 for a free, no-obligation consultation. That's Paul Vanas at 401-265-6144.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Vanas, and welcome to Real Estate Pro Talk. This is a real estate-oriented program which will cover a variety of real estate topics every Friday afternoon from 3 to 4 on WOON Radio. Some of the topics that we'll be talking about during our time together will be how to buy and sell a home, how to choose a real estate agent, how to choose a mortgage broker, flipping real estate, home inspections, how to buy a property with an IRA, and finally how to develop a piece of raw land to accommodate your dream home. I've been in the real estate business coming up on 40 years now, of which I own a real estate brokerage company, a real estate school, and a land development company. All of the knowledge that we are going to try to impart on you today is based on the continuing education classes that I teach licensed real estate brokers and agents, along with my personal experience and those of our expert guests. The goal in doing so you'll have information in hand when you meet a seasoned real estate broker. That way you'll know exactly what they're talking about. You're welcome to call us today at 401-766-1240, 401-766-1240, and ask any questions on the subjects we'll be discussing. Our guest consultant today is Lori Donahue with the law offices of Glenn Andreoni. Say hello, Lori.
Good afternoon, everyone.
I'm glad you came in today because very rarely do you hear about the legal aspect of real estate. You know, we always hear about the sales and we always hear about the appraising and we hear about the home inspections. But, you know, without the closing attorney, there is no closing. I mean, it's a very complex thing to close a house now as compared to years ago because there's paperwork and title work, and hopefully, today you'll clarify some of those things. But before we get into that, I'm always interested about how someone got into the business that they've gone into. Tell me, where did you start? How did you become a lawyer?
Well, I started as a receptionist at a real estate law firm, and then for about 16, 17 years, I worked for a small law office that did many different things, but a majority of which was real estate, both residential and commercial. And then I decided I wanted to go to law school because I wanted to concentrate in real estate closing aspect of law. So as I became a paralegal, I retained my bachelor's degree, and then I went to law school, and I didn't become an attorney until I was 40.
Really?
And
wow.
then I started working for Glenn Andreoni's office. We're in Lincoln.
Yep.
And I just love working with people, trying to resolve title issues, get the closing done.
Right. You know, it's funny because, and again, I'm always interested in how people became what they are today. It just seems that today people kind of jump around from career to career. Like my dad was a plumber. And he knew he wanted to be a plumber at 13 years old, playing with pipes, and he was a plumber his whole life, and he that's all he did.
Yeah.
But it seems in this day and age, people kind of move from career to career until they find basically what I call home. I know, like my son, for example, was in college, and I think 3/4 of his friends changed their major halfway through the college experience, and you say, wow, for my generation that's a little weird because I always knew what I wanted to be, yet people are changing now, so that's fantastic. So did you go to night school?
Yes.
Wow, so that must have been something. That's quite an accomplishment after working a whole long hard day. And then
Yep, I worked full-time. It ended up being a paralegal by the time I went to school. And before law school, I bartended two different jobs at the same time.
Wow.
I don't know how I did it because I would never be able to do it now. But
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, that's wow. That's quite an accomplishment. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And
Thank
we're
you very
glad I've
much.
known you for at least 10 or
12 years, yeah.
When the law offices of Glenn Andreoni at one time was right across the street from the studio here over on Park Avenue, and Glenn's office, you moved to 628 George Washington Highway about 5 years ago.
Yes.
Right in front of the Lincoln Mall.
Yeah.
If you pull into his office, don't get confused that you're going to McDonald's. You're not going to McDonald's. You're going to Glenn's office.
Exactly.
Right? And that's quite a location. But tell me, how do you see things right now, Lori? I mean, your office. Every time I go by your office, there's always cars, and there's people going in and out, and it's a busy environment.
Yes.
Do you see things still on the
Moving
upbeat?
right along.
Really,
Yes. Yep.
really. Mm-hmm. Do you do a lot of refis, or it's mostly new
Right
purchases?
now, it's a lot of refinancing because the rates are awesome. So people are taking advantage of that. But we do see more purchases than we do refinancing.
Really?
But for a time, there was no refinancing going on. But right now, yeah, there's quite a few refinancing.
Now, is there any difference between, like, from a closing perspective? Is there any difference between a refinance and a regular purchase?
The only difference, you still do the same title work. You still do the same procedure. However, you would have the added purchase and sale agreement negotiations and a seller and a buyer involved in coordinating to get to the closing table.
I see.
So the big difference is, getting your purchase and sale agreement, appraisal, inspections, all of that when you're doing a purchase.
I see. So is that rule still in effect? I know for our listeners, they may not be aware of this because the rates right now are unbelievably low. I
Yes.
mean, they're in the threes, I think.
They are,
the
yeah.
high threes. And some folks might be listening to this broadcast today who want to, refinance and maybe call your office and
Yeah.
have a closing with you.
Mm-hmm.
On a refinance, now, if I remember right, and correct me if I'm wrong, the biggest difference is what between a purchase and a refinance is that there's a 3-day right of rescission, right?
If it's a refinance of your primary residence,
Yep.
the federal government mandates that you have a 3 business day right to rescind, which means you have 3 business days to think about whether you want to go forward or not.
I see.
And I think that comes from back in the 80s and early 90s when there were people charging different points and different interest rates could go 3 points in between.
Right.
So they wanted you to be able to get to the closing and then have a right to go look around.
I
That
see.
really doesn't happen right now because the government mandates what real estate brokers and actual lenders can do.
I see.
So you still have that right and you can't waive it.
Yeah, and I think I know of only one. Maybe you do hundreds of more closings than I attend, but from my experience, the people that I deal with every day, I think I know one in 35 years that actually rescinded. In other words, for our listeners who don't know what a right of rescission is, it means after the closing, the consumer can call up and say, they have 3 days to cancel it. We've had second thoughts or
Correct.
whatever, and there's no
For
harm,
any reason.
no harm, no foul.
Right. They don't get reimbursed any of the funds they put up front, though.
Yeah, so for
That's
the appraisal and application
that gets
fees
paid
and all
because
that
the
stuff.
job was already done.
Right.
So people don't get confused. Nothing gets dispersed. Your mortgage isn't paid off. No money moves, and the transaction does
Oh,
not
okay.
get
That's a good
recorded
point.
during that 3 days.
Right.
And as you asked, during the time when I was a paralegal back in the late 90s, we had about 5 rescissions at a
Really?
different place that I worked. Working at Glenn Andreoni's office, I had 1.
Really?
And it ended up reclosing with the same lender. It was just a misunderstanding. It had nothing to do with the rate, or it wasn't the lender. It was actually the homeowner misunderstood some things, and we got it all straightened out, and it was fine.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and it's a very rare,
very rare
occurrence. I only mention it because a lot of folks think. I had a situation a few months ago where someone bought a house, and of course, how when you whisper in someone's ear, and with the game you used to play in school, and the teacher has it go all around the room, and by the time it goes all around the room, the apple is an orange.
Yes.
Well, these folks thought that if they bought a house and 3 days later they can just bring the keys back.
No, I've heard that. Seriously heard that in a closing. People will say to me, I have 3 days to think about this anyway, and I sometimes think they're joking, but sometimes I'm not so sure.
Right.
You do not have a right to rescind the transaction when you purchase. It
Right.
is done upon closing.
Exactly, and
recording.
It's a done deal. Once
a
the
done
papers
deal.
are signed, and
Yeah.
you know that you
Yeah.
own it, you own
That's
the key, and you know
Yeah.
that's just funny because
You're done.
Again, this just happened, a little while ago, and I was saying to myself, well, you heard the same rumor that's been floating around for the last 20 years.
Exactly.
So how does you're a busy attorney with Glenn's office, and Glenn's certainly a busy person. Primarily, how does the law offices of Glenn Andreoni derive their business, closing business? I'm sure there's other legal work that you guys do, but as
We
far as
we like to concentrate on settlement transactions, whether it be commercial or residential. We derive business all different avenues, from real estate agents, from lenders, from contacts that we've known for years, friends, family, just
Sure.
people that come back that have used us before. All different avenues.
So your business really is no different from my business. I'm in sales, and
Yes.
my referral base that I've built, that I started
Yes.
building, a lot of years ago. You hope that that it's the not only the parties that you did business with before, but now the children and the grandchildren
Yes.
and the cousins
and we've
and
had
the
that a
uncles.
lot. Oh, my parents closed with you guys.
Imagine
or my
that.
cousin. Or my aunt.
Yep.
Things like that.
That's
But
when you
yeah.
know you're getting old, though. That's the problem.
Exactly.
I had a call a few months ago from someone who was the granddaughter, and she said, Paul, you sold my grandfather his house, and I was like, oh my God, is this really happening?
Exactly.
I've become my father. It's just the transition. But so in a typical closing, you've seen a lot of these. What? There's certain expectations when people walk into a closing, and I remember, and I have to tell the audience this story because, especially when you're a first-time home buyer, my first house that I bought, I went to work the morning of the closing, and of course I announced to everybody at work that I had a closing that day, and everyone at work proceeded to tell me every horror story that was that they heard of and that they had experienced about real estate closings and how I was going to get taken advantage of and so on and so forth, and it was so bad that and keep in mind, our first purchase was from a couple who were the nicest people in the world. But these folks at work wound me up to the point where I was sitting at the closing table with my teeth gnashed, and my wife was actually giving me a knee under the table, like loosen up. And then the woman, the wife of the party that we were selling, finally said to me, and we left all the curtains for you, Paul. I ironed them all last night, and we put them in a chest of drawer for you, and we left that downstairs, and we filled up the oil tank for you, and there's no charge. We're not even charging you for the oil, and we just hope that you love the house as much as we have over the past 40 years. And all of a sudden I felt like this huge jerk, right? And then it finally hit me. But I'm sure you get a lot of that. It's the tensions are high, right?
Very high.
Yeah, especially with a first-time purchaser, because they're hearing the stories that that I heard.
Even when they're going on to their second or third purchase, especially if there's a domino effect, meaning one person selling, in order for them to sell to the next person, the next person has to sell their house, and everybody has to coordinate between 3 or 4 closings. Inevitably, there will be a problem.
Right.
Someone will have a title issue. Someone, they can't get a payoff. Someone can't time out of work. And they try to do those 4 closings, or even 2, on the same day, back to back. It is very difficult to get accomplished. We do get it accomplished,
Sure.
but it's not easy.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody, the sellers, the buyers, the agents, everybody is on the edge of their seat trying to get it done. We need to get it done. We need to get it done. What I think is people have to have realistic expectations, and they need to know that up front. So all the parties in the transaction, from the lender to the agent to the attorney, should explain to people what to expect,
Right.
so that can calm their nerves a little bit as they move forward through the transaction.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like anything else, the more people you have involved in anything, the more complicated it gets.
Yes.
If you have one of these domino type sales.
Yeah.
One house is sold subject to the other house selling subject to the other house. You almost become like an air traffic controller at Logan Airport.
Exactly.
And you have all these jets coming in, and you don't.
And then there's all different attorneys involved,
Right.
Because it's not the same attorney that represents all buyers and all the sellers. So there's a bunch of sellers attorneys, there's a bunch of lender or buyer attorneys.
Right.
So you have a lot of parties involved.
Absolutely, and of course you got all your staff at
Yes.
the office that are working diligently
Yes,
to try to
yep.
get this thing done.
Yeah, the
and-
paralegals and administrative assistants, all.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I know your crew over there at the law office. They're always busy. There's always something
yeah.
going on.
They're
There's-
great.
yeah,
They've
oh,
been
yeah.
there forever.
Oh yeah.
They know
yeah.
their job excellent.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I noticed that. At the end of the day, everything gets done.
It gets done.
and that's the most important.
We know it's going to get done,
Right.
if possible.
Yeah.
But when we try to explain that to people, they get themselves so upset. And when we try to explain it to them, if they're not advised of this earlier in the transaction, there's no calming them down when it's at the last minute.
Right.
And that's why I say everybody needs to work from the beginning to explain to people what to expect.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I've always appreciated about your office, and you and Glenn have done a wonderful job at that. You try to deflate the stress out of it, and if there is an issue, and sometimes there are, you can't help issues. You try to work through them and in a professional manner, and just get it done and make sure everybody's happy in the transaction. And it's a win-win situation. Yeah, that's great. Because. Your office, the closings, it's like a revolving door out in front of your office, right? You guys, how many closings? I don't know exactly what number, but
a lot.
You always have several a day, right?
Oh, yes.
It's not like you're the old country lawyer out there, and somewhere in East Connecticut that closes one house every 2 weeks or something.
No.
You're seeing a lot of people every day, right?
Yeah.
So you have an example, Lori, of how you represented someone at a closing that they just made some common mistakes, and you had to kind of step in to make sure that they did the right thing, or to get through the transaction, a buyer or seller.
Okay.
Or to maybe rephrase that question, what's the most common mistake buyers and sellers will make going to a closing?
Generally, buyers are in pretty good shape
Okay.
because they've already dealt with not only their real estate agent, their lender.
Yeah.
And the lending part of the buyer side of the transaction is the most important, because if you go buy a car or new furniture for your new house, your credit is going to change.
Right.
And if they don't advise them, that's the worst thing I've seen happen.
I see.
Someone went out and bought furniture, and they always do a credit check the day before or the day of the closing. And unfortunately, and this is a true story, they bought a lot of furniture, and their credit debt to income ratio changed to such an effect that they could no longer qualify for that
Really?
mortgage.
So they weren't
They
aware.
lost their deposit,
Okay.
and they could not buy the property.
Really?
It was very sad. I did everything to try. There's nothing you can do in that situation.
Really?
They now have to wait till their credit gets back.
Wow.
I've only seen that happen once.
So they weren't aware, basically, that their
No,
credit gets checked again.
Right, they used some company you don't get to talk to a person, that
Yeah.
you're just 1-800 blah blah.
Yeah.
And they weren't coached in
Right.
what you need to do and what you need to be careful for during the process when you begin the process of qualifying, and then getting the final commitment. And then the day of closing, you never ever do anything with your credit until after you've closed, the deed's recorded, and you're done.
I see. And that's a really important point, because most people don't understand, especially if they're right on the fringe of
They
qualifying.
think they're done. They've already got a commitment letter. They
Right,
think they're all
right.
set, but they make that call. Nowadays, especially, right the day before the closing, they make that call to verify you're still in that debt to income ratio
Right.
where you qualify.
And I remember years ago I had some folks. All my stories are always years ago. It's always years ago. I had some people that bought, believe it or not, a set of Encyclopedia Britannicas, and that it was like $20 a month or whatever for the next 20 years or whatever they had to
exactly.
pay. They went to one of these home shows, and the Encyclopedia Britannica guy did a sales pitch on them, and they said, "Oh, this is great for the kids," and blah blah blah, and they signed up for it. and somehow they were so close on the qualifications. The lender came back and said, hey, look, you got to write an explanation why you bought basically Encyclopedia Britannicas. But then again, other emergencies come up too. Let's say your car died and you have to run out and buy a new car. I can see someone running out not thinking.
Right, you wouldn't even think about it. You're like, well, I have to replace my car. I need a way to get to work in this. But before you do anything, you talk to your lender to find out if you have enough room for you, because your credit's always going to move every time you do something.
Right.
If you put more, if you charge a credit card more, now you have less between the open amount that you're able to use.
Right.
Lowers your credit. Once you pay it off, it hires your credit. It's moving all the time.
Right.
So I always tell everybody, don't do anything with your credit, buying anything with credit cards, unless you speak to your lender.
I see. Yeah, that's really good advice, because that's very really. I always try to do that in the real estate world.
Right.
After you get burnt a couple
Well,
of times.
that's what happens. People learn.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, we do this every single day.
Right.
So we take for granted things that people don't even understand.
Absolutely.
And wouldn't even think of. And you try to remember that and say, oh, don't do this, and this. You know what I mean?
Right.
And make sure, even if they hear it 3 times from their agent, their lender, and the attorney,
Just to make
at
sure.
least somebody told them.
Absolutely. I used to have every year the RV show would come to Providence, and I actually used to have that on my calendar, and I would tell buyers, believe it or not, who were pending at that time, waiting to close on their house. Now, the RV show is down at the Providence Civic Center. Please don't go out and buy an RV this weekend, because that will affect your house. But we laugh about it, but it's true.
But it's true.
You're
not
bring
thinking
that up.
about it.
What about like the sellers? The sellers, I'm sure. I mean, you asked them to bring a variety of things
Yes.
to the closing, right?
More problems with the sellers.
Okay.
So sellers will, if they don't have an agent, will, even though we tell them, they forget to get the smoke detector certificate, which we cannot close without. Even with agents, and I know the agents because I know some of these agents have been doing this forever. I know they've told them that they need to have everything out room swept condition. Invariably, we will sit down at that closing table and there will be an issue because the seller thought they had another week to get the rest of their stuff out.
I see.
So they still have a half a house full of stuff, and now everybody's upset.
Wow.
And we have to try to bring everybody to calm down. We can
Right.
figure it out.
Yep.
How long can you do this? We'll hold X amount in escrow. You need to get it out as soon as possible because our people need to move in. They're living in a hotel right now.
Absolutely.
People don't understand the effect it has on everybody else involved in the transaction.
Sure.
Now, that doesn't happen all the time, but a lot more than you'd think.
So the last minute stuff, so I call that last minute.
We're literally at the closing tables when I find out.
Right. Wow. So you basically, the remedy is let's hold a little bit of money
If they
back,
have money.
if they have it,
And-
and try to get the matter resolved.
Right.
After
We
the
don't
fact.
like to do that. No one wants to hold an escrow
Right.
because that's when a fight ensues. Then you have to go to Superior Court. No one wants to do that.
Right.
But you certainly don't want to blow up the deal and say, we're not closing today.
Exactly.
So we try to come to an agreement where all parties are happy.
Yeah.
Type up an agreement, sign it,
Yeah.
and hopefully it resolves itself in a few days to a week.
Right.
But I did have one situation. We signed an agreement, and the person said she promised she was going to get all the stuff out, and the day came, and the way I wrote the agreement was that the seller had to, because I represented the buyer, the seller had to have the stuff out by midnight on a specific date, and that if she didn't, automatically the funds held in escrow would go to pay whatever the bill was, who the buyer chose to get all the junk out of there.
To clean the house out.
And
Right.
that's what happened.
Really? Yeah, because the sales agreements are typically, broom clean.
Yeah,
Right.
you don't have to scrub it,
Right.
spick and span, but you certainly don't leave personal belongings and junk. And,
Right. That's.
I've had all kind of things happen, but
That's only
basically the thing that mostly that misunderstanding on when they have to have their stuff out. And I know it's stressful,
Yeah.
especially when it's older people moving and they don't have people to
Absolutely.
help them.
Yeah,
It's very stressful.
20 years of belongings
Yeah,
piled
yeah,
up. Wow.
it's hard.
Wow.
So you don't want to get mad at anybody. You just want to get everybody to
Exactly.
let's
Exactly.
work
Just
it out.
Conform to the agreement. The
Yeah.
agreement is the
Yep.
boilerplate for the relationship, and
Yeah.
just make sure it's a win-win. Wow, that's great stuff. Lori, I want to stay on that vein, but right now I just want to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Real Estate Pro Talk is a live radio talk show dedicated to educating its listeners on the entire spectrum of real estate matters. Part of the American dream is owning a home or investment property, or perhaps even becoming a real estate agent yourself. Paul Vanas and his team of real estate professionals have over 250 combined years of experience in the industry. In other words, we can make it happen for you. Why go down the road less traveled when we can put you directly on the real estate superhighway? Whether buying or selling in today's complicated real estate market, or if you just need advice about jumping into the real estate business for a career change, you'll need a decisive edge based on experience. Call Paul Vanas at 401-265-6144 for a free, no-obligation consultation. That's Paul Vanas at 401-265-6144.
And we are back on this beautiful fall afternoon. It's spectacular weather. This is one of the nicest falls, I got to tell you, as far as the foliage is concerned.
It's beautiful.
Maybe it's because I'm paying attention now. I never used to pay attention. When you're young, you don't really look at that stuff. But now you go down the road in awe and say, "Oh, wow, that's a nice looking tree." But in any event, on that vein, Lori, we were just talking about because that's an important issue, whether the house is cleaned out or not, and all of the documentation.
Well, you also have to worry about now that the closing has been completed and the deeds recorded and the people still have their own, the seller's possessions are still in there. What about if damage is caused? What about if the house burns down? There's a lot of things, so no one wants to do it.
Right.
Then the other thing is where we can't close, but the seller has agreed to allow the buyer to move in. Or we can close, and the buyer has agreed to allow the seller stay in the property after closing.
In reverse.
And either way.
Yeah.
Now you have a different owner. You don't want to set up a landlord-tenant issue. You have to we do occupancy and hold harmless agreements, but there's only so much you can do to protect it.
Sure.
And then, I always have the people that live there, the non-owner, get renter's insurance, and then the owner get their own insurance. And you put a time frame on it, and generally they don't charge money. Sometimes they do because they're paying the mortgage. If it's going to be a long term, more than a month.
So if someone, for example, let's say someone's building a house.
Yes.
And they negotiate with the buyers, like, we'll close to help you out to get the rate lock that you got within 30 or 45 or 60 days, but I'm going to need another month after that for my house to be ready. Right. They may turn around and say, tell you what, I'll rent the house back from you for whatever your mortgage is, or...
Well, you can do that, but you have to be careful on the time frame also, because you are entering into an agreement with the lender stating that it's your intention to move into this property 30 days, 60 days. You're not going to rent it out to somebody for 6 months.
Right.
Short term would be fine.
I see. So especially if one of the terms of the conditions that it's an owner-occupied mortgage, so
Correct.
A lot of these like FHA and Violent
you have to
housing.
be careful. You can do it, but for a short term.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because I remember years ago, my business partner and I sold a new construction, and we went to a closing with an attorney, and it wasn't the law offices of Glenn Andreoni, I can tell you that, because obviously when you sell.
You don't choose.
You're going to wherever the buyer's mortgage company selected. So we ended up with an attorney, and it was a Friday afternoon kind of thing before a holiday, and we closed, and everybody was happy and shook hands, and the keys went back and forth, and so on and so forth. So on that Tuesday morning, I had called the attorney's office, and I said, can I pick up my funds, my proceeds check? And they said, well, not yet. And this was at 10 o'clock in the morning, and so I called at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They said, well, your funds aren't ready yet. So I started to get a little nervous, and then the following morning, Wednesday, I called for my check, and they said, well, your funds still aren't ready. I said, okay, what's going on here? There's something that's very wrong. In the meantime, the people we sold the house to moved in. Yeah. Their relatives came up from Ohio to help them move, and now they were all settled over the weekend, and they got the big screen TV on the wall, and everybody's happy. And come to find out, the lender had filed for bankruptcy on that Friday afternoon.
Oh boy.
Unbeknownst to us and unbeknownst to the closing attorney, who never really checked to see if the loan was funded, You know?
Before did they record?
They did not record.
No.
So now I'm in a situation where we had people in our house. It's now they're almost like tenants now.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I can't ask them to leave and give me my house back kind of thing. I had to work with them. But these things happen, I'm sure, every day.
Was that
right?
in 2008-9?
Actually, it was earlier than that. It was like
Oh.
around 2001, 2002.
Oh, okay, back.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. And it was fortunate that the people that were living in the house were very gracious, and they understood that it was their mortgage company that was the problem. And they ended up going to get another mortgage, and we waited an additional 30 days, and we worked it out financially and so on and so
Right.
forth. But they were very gracious. But I'm sure if they weren't so gracious, or if we weren't so gracious, one of the two parties could make that a nightmare, right?
Most sellers would not have done what you did. They would have had a fit and went to the lawyers and got them evicted and blah blah blah.
Right.
But that was nice that you did that.
Yeah,
That's
and-
how you should work with people.
Because we realized that really it wasn't
How would
their
they know?
fault. Yeah, it wasn't
Right.
their fault that they didn't know their lender was going to file, and then it was, I won't mention the name of the lender, but it was a pretty ugly. From what I understand, they had a few others like
Oh,
that
yeah.
that were pretty ugly. So the type of so you're seeing this drama every day. It's like Days of Our Lives, right? It's as the world turns. Is that one of the
Yeah.
so that's not only, you got a tough job, because not only do you have to accommodate all of the paperwork and all the legalese and A to B to C to D, you also have to deal with the drama of everyone coming and going, and the timing of things, and emotions are high.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of weight to have,
Yeah,
and everyone thinks, well, it's just a closing attorney. We
Well,
don't have to
no.
worry. We just come in and sign papers
That's
and
not
leave.
true. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
To make it a smooth transaction, and if it turns out not to be smooth, to get it back on track to be smooth.
I'm sure.
And it requires talking to people, making sure they understand, making sure they don't misunderstand. Sometimes someone needs an extension, and there's always a fight about that. They get nervous. Why is an extension? But it's normal.
Right.
People look for extensions all the time. It's not the person's fault. The lender might need an extension. Maybe they couldn't get the required documentation in time.
Right.
There's all different types of issues. It's not always that someone's trying to, scam you, and that's people get nervous. They think,
Of course.
oh, they're up to something. They're doing something, but that's not it.
Of course. And that's the way we're trained in life. We're trained to be careful,
to be
beware,
careful.
look out,
Yes.
all through our lives.
Yeah.
Don't look at the
But that's
fine
why you
print,
have a
don't
real
sign
estate agent,
anything.
a lender, and an attorney. We're looking out for that for you.
Absolutely.
We're going to protect you if we think something's going on here.
Right.
So you have to trust in your team.
Right, and that's important. That
Very
trust,
important.
that trust
Yeah.
element, especially, and then there's the compassion that goes along
Well,
with
yeah.
it. Too. That's huge. So what, tell our audience, and if you can explain to our audience, I should say, what's the typical pack? I mean, when you go to a closing now, I know the stack of papers is about an inch thick, but generally, what do the sellers have to sign when
The
they go
sellers
to a
don't
closing?
have much to sign. If it's an FHA or Rhode Island housing with any special programs, the sellers will have a few more additional documents to sign. Generally, they sign the deed. If they're a Rhode Island resident, they sign a residency affidavit. But when you sell property in Rhode Island, if you're a non-resident, you have to deal with the Rhode Island Division of Taxation,
Right.
who wants their capital gains up front. They don't want you to do it when you file your taxes because they're afraid you won't file your taxes.
I see. That's
the
for
following
out-of-state
year.
residents only.
Out-of-state residents only.
Okay.
They sign, we figure out if it's their primary residence,
Yeah.
2 out of the last 5 years, and they're selling it for either $250 if they're single or $500,000 if they're married. If it's under those terms, they do not have to pay a capital gain. If it's over those terms, there's documentation that they have to fill out for the federal
I
capital
see.
gains.
I see.
Adjustment agreement, relative to get the closing attorney will obtain the taxes, water, sewer, payoffs, things like that. That's based on information provided to us by a third party. So we ask the parties to agree. In the event that information was provided to us incorrectly,
If it's off
they
by
would pay their fair share.
$50 or something.
Yeah, it's always something small.
Right.
Survey affidavit, which is relative to title insurance. There's not much.
Right.
Really.
So, well, let me just go back to the deed for a second, because you mentioned the deed. Now, like I notice, and I did it too. I mean, you after a closing, you get a letter in the mail a couple of weeks after the closing with your deed.
Yes.
And it's like, what do I do with this thing? Do I put it in a safe? Do I go get a safety deposit box at the bank? Do I shove it under the mattress? A lot of folks don't understand really that deed that they have in their possession, although it's nice to have, it's not necessary, right?
The only reason I could think it would be necessary to have the original deed, and I don't even think these days it would be, is if there was a litigation matter, and I don't do litigation, so I'm just putting it out there. They want an original document, but I would imagine that a certified copy from the clerk's office, which is where the deed is recorded, land evidence, would be sufficient. So no, I mean, I wouldn't throw it out and shred it or anything.
Right.
It's nice to have,
But it's
but
not-
I don't think it's necessary to, get a safe deposit box.
Right. It's not.
Put it with
it's
your
not one of
important
those
papers.
documents
No.
like 100 years ago. When
No,
you,
yeah,
you
right.
had to have this thing, or else that was your only proof
Yeah.
of ownership, and you had to make
Right.
sure.
Now everything's online.
Right.
So it's not like in the old days when there were, the paper books and the town hall burned down and then there's no evidence.
Exactly.
Everything's laser-fiche and online, and there's other ways in which to get certified copies.
And there's probably 24 copies floating between the mortgage company.
Well,
and
you
the
can't
bank
just use a
and
copy. It wouldn't be any copy. It would have to be certified from the town hall. But like I said, if they laser-fiche all their stuff or somehow made it, paperless, they would be able to certify as a true, copy.
I see. So, it's funny. An analogy I use. I teach a class on town hall. An analogy I use in my classes is that just picture yourself back in old England, 400 years ago, and you traded a bag of silver, 3 goats, and a cow, and the landowner gave you 40 acres,
Right.
and he gave you a deed. Just imagine 400 years ago. Well, what do I do with this deed? Do I hide it under a rock? Do I because it's not like the living conditions were a little bit different.
Right.
So it was a valuable piece of paper.
Yes.
More so than today.
Right.
So that deed then, after the closing, that deed gets transported to the local town hall. Or
Yes.
City Hall.
In Rhode Island.
In Rhode
Mass
Island.
is different. It's a registry of deeds. But in Rhode Island, it goes to the land evidence records, which is in the city town clerk's office.
I see. And what function does that serve?
So they take it in, they stamp it with whatever the tax stamps are, which is $4.60 per thousand based on the sale price, which the seller pays at closing.
And where does that money go? That money
To the
goes-
town and to the state. It's I don't know what the percentage is, but the town gets some and the state gets
So that's
some.
a non-negotiable
Non-negotiable tax that the seller pays.
$4.60 per
Per
thousand, regardless of what you can try to negotiate.
Unless you're the federal government or Rhode Island Housing.
Of course. Okay.
You have to be a federal entity exempt from that provision.
I see.
And they stamp it with a book and page and the date and time that it was
see.
recorded. They scan it in, and then they give you back the original.
Okay.
Now, years ago, you would go and you'd have to leave the original with them. They would actually stamp them and everything. You wouldn't even get a copy. We used to write on it the book and page, the
Wow.
date, and then they had to take it, and like 2 months later, you'd get it back because they had to get it copied and put in book form.
I see.
Now it's all just scanned in, and the original goes right back to you at the time that you record.
Wow. So once it's recorded, it's official.
It's official.
It's official. Everybody, a constructive notice. Everybody
Yeah.
knows that you
Yeah,
bought the
it's
house
public
on
notice. Yep.
on so-and-so street.
Yep.
Yeah. And now, really, that's probably the most important document that a seller signs at the closing, right?
Yes.
Is the deed, and then the next one would be what, like the
They can-
financial settlement statement, or
Well,
what?
the settlement statement and the deed, because
Okay.
they know what they're getting.
I see.
They want to verify that it's in conjunction with what the purchase and sale agreement said.
Yeah.
And the deed conveying it to the buyer.
I see. So on the buyer's side now, shifting over to the buyer, what are the important documents they have to sign at the closing?
So what I always tell everybody, because there's about 200 pages that you have to sign, most of that 200 pages you've already signed their disclosure forms. The lender has already provided them to you to sign and review. Certainly I'll go over them all with the people. I don't just ignore them, but they're not important. They don't obligate you to something.
Right.
You want to see the figures. It's not a settlement statement anymore. It's called a CD, closing disclosure.
I see.
And you want to make sure that's the same as the loan estimate that was provided to you by the lender. For example, the interest rate, what your payment's going to be. And and then the fees and expenses that are charged to you.
Right.
Today, it's very rare to be wrong because of the way the federal government regulates how that information is disclosed.
I see.
The biggest thing that changes is there will be credits and debits relative to taxes, rents, sewer, water, things like that. And that will change that bottom figure that the loan estimate said you needed to bring to closing.
Oh, okay. So the loan officer is estimating how much you should bring, but then by the time it gets to you, you're figuring out, like if they closed on the 263rd day of the month, you're figuring out the taxes and the water and the sewer right to that day, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And a lot of people don't understand that. The lender doesn't get that information. That is obtained and done literally a day, 2 days at the most before the closing, because we don't know when the closing is exactly going to be.
I see.
Just because the purchase and sale says a certain date, that we don't know if that's really going to be the date that it closes.
I see.
So that's when we figure out all that information.
Wow.
And then the note, of course, is the most important thing. It's generally 3 pages. It obligates you. You're promising to pay back the bank the amount you borrowed at a certain interest rate over a certain term.
Yep.
That's the document that if you don't pay it, the bank can then sue you for that balance.
I see.
And the mortgage deed is the security agreement. That's the document that gets recorded to put a lien against the property, securing that payment. So if you default, there's 2 things the bank can do. They can follow the Rhode Island general law to be able to foreclose on the property.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if they don't get enough money, they can take the promissory note and sue you under contract law to obtain the balance of the deficiency,
the difference,
meaning the money that you still owe.
I see. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because a lot of folks don't understand that the difference between the note and the mortgage. The mortgage is not the loan. People think, I'm signing a mortgage, and they think that's the loan. The mortgage is just the document that gives the lender permission, essentially, to take the property back.
Right, it's the security agreement.
Okay, yeah, and then the promissory
The note is the most important thing you'll sign.
And that has the interest rate and how much your payment's going to be and the term.
But that's where you promise your obligation is to pay that money back over the term at the interest rate that you signed for, and that is the most important document on the entire transaction, along with the closing disclosure, because those are the figures. And I mean, you know what they are when you're sitting there, and if there's any discrepancy, we take care of it right then and there.
I see. So the note then, does the note, the mortgage gets recorded at town hall?
First the deed, then the mortgage.
But not the promissory note?
No,
so
promissory note does not get recorded.
You can't go and look up your neighbor's house to see what their mortgage payment is per month, and you just know how much the face amount of the mortgage was.
And when it was taken out.
Because that's interesting, because I have a lot of folks in the foreclosure. I teach a flipping class, and they think they can go down and just research the payment.
All they know is that a mortgage was taken out in 2008 with the principal amount of $250,000.
Wow.
They don't know what payments were made. And by the way, when people default under their note, in the horrible times of 2008 to 2010, maybe 2012, when all those short sales and foreclosures were going on, you would be surprised because the interest gets lopped on, and there will be like a $65,000 deficiency that's put on top of what the already outstanding balance is, so that actual payoff is tremendous. It's outstanding.
More than the value of the house.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
I noticed that too, and it's funny you mentioned 2012, 2013 when all the foreclosures were happening, because I attend auctions, as you know, and it might be a $200,000 house, and all of a sudden the bid from the bank, the auctioneer will say, well, 328.8 or something.
Exactly.
Say, well, how did it go from a $200,000 mortgage that was taken out in 2006? You figured they would have paid some down a little bit, to 328.8, and it's a huge difference. And of course, that means no one's going to bid on the house.
No.
And the bank is going to take that house back, and then they're going to turn around and they're going to put it on the market for whatever market value is, right?
That's right.
And of course, the difference is sometimes they're insured. The banks are insured.
Correct.
For the difference.
And that's why they don't sell it they can't, because then they
Right.
won't get that.
They won't get so.
Right.
Okay, that's a good point. So, and a lot of folks don't understand it. Like my father's generation, he would say, "Well, you go to the auction, and you're dealing with the banker from the manager who's in the branch down the street,
Exactly.
and they take what they can get."
No.
And no, it's a whole different world, because these mortgages, the mortgages now that you have people execute at the closing, they're usually sold, right, to third
Yes.
parties. Insurance companies buy them, and
Yeah,
different
they're assigned on the
corporate
secondary
entities.
market. Yeah, we don't see those asset-backed securities like we did. That's what the whole short sale market came on foreclosures. But they still still sell them on the secondary market. But even if you did, maybe one of the credit unions, one of the bankers might show up. I don't know.
Right.
But generally, at a foreclosure, you have the auctioneer. Does the attorney's office even show up?
Sometimes they do. Sometimes
Sometimes they don't, right.
Sometimes
So-
the auctioneer, if it's like an Oregon bank or something,
Right, it's just the auctioneer. Even though because a lot of them have attorneys in Connecticut, Mass,
Correct.
some Rhode Island.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the only rule is that falls under the auctioneer's license is they have to have 1 foot on the property. So they usually keep a foot on the curb, and they'll read the notice, and then of course either the bank is going to take it back or someone's going to buy it in the street.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, have you seen foreclosures slow down? I mean, I know I don't see as many auctions as
I do
used
not
to.
see a lot of foreclosures.
Okay.
They're still floating out there. There's enough of them.
Right.
I mean, I close foreclosures every single month.
Yeah.
Not as many as we used to, but there's still a good majority.
I see.
I see a lot of people bought foreclosures and now they're selling them to a normal buyer.
Okay.
They've already rehabbed it or fixed it or whatever they did.
I see.
I
Wow.
see a lot of that.
Yeah, that's interesting to know, because I know that's usually a sign of a much better economy.
Yes.
Of the inventory out there.
Yeah.
I don't see as many.
No,
as I did.
not anything close to what it used to be.
Wow.
No.
So we have about 12 minutes left, and we're going to take just another short commercial break with Lori Donahue of the law offices of Glenn Andreoni, and we will be right back.
Real Estate Pro Talk is a live radio talk show dedicated to educating its listeners on the entire spectrum of real estate matters. Part of the American dream is owning a home or investment property, or perhaps even becoming a real estate agent yourself. Paul Vanas and his team of real estate professionals have over 250 combined years of experience in the industry. In other words, we can make it happen for you. Why go down the road less traveled when we can put you directly on the real estate superhighway? Whether buying or selling in today's complicated real estate market, or if you just need advice about jumping into the real estate business for a career change, you'll need a decisive edge based on experience. Call Paul Vanas at 401-265-6144 for a free, no-obligation consultation. That's Paul Vanas at 401-265-6144.
And we're back with Lori Donahue of the law offices of Glenn Andreoni. And again, thanks for listening in today. We hope some of this information will help you out with your buying and selling needs. And of course, you don't necessarily have to call into the radio station with a question. You can always call me after the fact at my cell number, which of course is 265-6144. And we'll be more than happy to direct you to the right real estate professional who can help you out. And hopefully you're listening today in the Blackstone Valley. The law office of Glenn Andreoni is right over there in front of the Lincoln Mall, very conveniently located. Lori is here from that law office, and they do hundreds and hundreds of closings a year, so they have it pretty much down pat.
We do.
You put in your apprenticeship. You don't have to practice anymore. You know what you're doing. Lori, what about title insurance? Now, that's a lot of folks don't understand the purpose of title insurance. What's the downright? Because you go to the closing and say, well, you got to buy title insurance because the bank usually, a lender usually requires you to buy title insurance. Why do they do that? Why does the lender do that?
The lender will absolutely not lend. Even private lenders won't lend without getting lender's title insurance, because lender's title insurance protects their interest in the property, and that lender's interest is the mortgage, the security agreement. So it protects against fraud. It protects against mistakes, misindexing, things that your eyes can't see. So, for instance, someone could come about and say, listen, I was an heir of so-and-so's estate, and it could be like 40 years later because it runs through the family. And I had an interest, or my parent or somebody had an interest in this land, and therefore there's a defect in the title. And if the lender wants to make sure they get paid back. So the title insurance company will defend and pay out any claims.
Right.
That only protects the lender. If you don't get owner's title insurance, which protects the owner, you are not covered.
I see.
So if if the mortgage was less than the value of the house, so say you took out a mortgage for $150 and the house is worth $400,000, the title insurance company is only obligated to defend and pay off that. Well, they'll pay whatever it is to defend it,
Right.
but they'll pay the $150. The mortgage will get paid off. You'll get nothing.
Right.
Had you had owner's title insurance, you would be compensated for your equity in the property.
Absolutely. So it's really wise. It's a wise choice to always ask for.
As an attorney, still get title insurance.
Yeah, I agree.
A misconception. This is what people will say to me. My family has owned this property for 60 years. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
The title insurance protects you from the day you buy it backward, meaning it's against the land till the beginning of time, basically.
Right.
So say a claim arose out of the 1800s,
Yeah.
and your family didn't even get involved in this till 1960, and the title is back, say in the early 40s or 50s,
Right.
and it doesn't mean that it's a claim that would be
Enforceable, like an enforceable claim.
it might not be enforceable, but it's still, you have to pay to defend it.
Right.
If you don't have title insurance will come in, they will defend it. The attorneys for the title insurance company will defend it. Otherwise, you're looking at, I don't know, it could be $25,000-$50,000, or if it's a
Right.
bigger type claim, it could be a lot more. So not only are you defending your own title if you don't get owner's title insurance, you're dishing out money.
Wow. And the title insurance now is paid for at one time only, right?
Correct.
It's paid at the closing.
Lenders,
it's not like auto insurance or
no.
homeowner's insurance.
So what happens is title insurance insures the owner at the time they got their deed. So basically, you're saying it's like it's insuring the deed backwards, all the way back. Lenders, same thing. The reason you have to get lender's title insurance more than once is because when you refinance, even if it's with the same lender, it's insuring from the mortgage deed back.
I see. That explains it. I always think of the story that I heard in the 70s about the folks down at the Mohican Sun, the tribal land down, who bought their homes after World War II. The World War was over. They built houses. They raised their kids. Some folks got title insurance. Some folks didn't because it was an option, basically, or if they paid cash, they had an option. And then all of a sudden, the tribal, the tribe laid claim to the real estate. And we always heard that the folks that that didn't have title insurance had to go out and hire their own lawyer and to defend that claim.
They did, yes. Yeah. And that's very expensive.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yes,
I'm
litigation is very complicated, time consuming.
Right.
And not only are you paying for the attorney, you're paying for all of the information, documentation, and expert witness and things like that. All of that adds up to a lot of money.
I see.
And you don't even want to have to deal with it.
Wow.
So you want to be able to have the title insurance company and their attorneys deal with it.
Absolutely, yeah. Just the cost, because as you know, I was involved in a title case a few years ago.
Exactly.
I had never been involved in a title case where someone laid claim to our real estate, and the title company,
Imagine what you would have had to pay.
Right.
Probably over $100,000.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of money. Yeah, that's great. Bottom line is that the lesson learned today is you should always buy
It's worth
title
it.
insurance, because you don't know the ghost in the closet
That's
from
right.
the past.
Another thing that happens a lot more is, say the title company does a title, they come back and they say you have a clean title, meaning there's no title defects or issues, and they approve us to move forward with the closing, and they issue lender's title insurance and hopefully issue owner's title insurance. You make that payment, one payment, like I said, and it's if you calculate, it's like $3.50 per thousand based on the purchase price.
I see.
And that includes both.
Yep.
There's an extra $50. It's called a simultaneous issuance. So it's relatively cheap if you think about it.
I see.
Now, what happens all the time is someone will inevitably go to refinance or sell, and there will be an undischarged mortgage from like 3 prior owners.
I see.
And
so
now you're
someone
like,
undischarged means that someone paid it off,
but they never got the discharge of
recorded-
mortgage
they
to
never-
take it off the title.
Okay.
And no one caught it for some reason.
Yeah.
Well, if you have owner's title insurance, we can go to that title insurance company and say, here's the policy, here's where, you insured this. Can you send a letter of indemnification indemnifying the new people buying it and their attorney and their title insurance company? Now you have no break in the time of closing.
I see.
If you didn't have owner's title insurance, the title insurance company will not give that letter of indemnification. And now you could be waiting up to 6 months to get a discharge of mortgage, and no one will close without it,
Right.
unless they have that indemnification letter.
And that's important, especially like that you talked about earlier with that domino effect. If you have all
Oh,
these
yeah.
houses stacked up and then you find out that there's an issue later on,
Mm-hmm.
and especially if it's the first domino in the chain,
You just stopped everything.
it just stopped everything in its tracks, and you have all these families now
Yeah.
that are basically stressful and angry, and it's not a nice situation.
No, I would never ever suggest that you should not get owner. I can't even think of a reason why you wouldn't get owner's title insurance,
Right.
especially now with a lot of the titles having the foreclosures and short sales. You don't know what's happening behind the scenes, stuff that you can't see. Like I said, I would always, the houses I've bought, I always pay for owner's title insurance.
It makes perfect
You do?
sense. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
No.
I mean, I go to the register now at Lowe's when I buy a drill, and they say for an extra $5 you can get a
I'll
2-year.
take it.
I always take it. I mean, you don't want to spend the money.
I know.
But I tell you, I've become so insurance prone now because.
Well, you're like, hey, if it's $5 and the thing breaks in a year and it's a 3-year warranty, I'm getting a brand new one for $5. So.
Exactly. That's great. Well, we got about 2 minutes to go, Lori.
Okay.
Tell me, are you optimistic about what the things that are happening right now? I mean, you see these people coming and going every
Yes,
day. Or?
we have new purchase and sale agreements coming in, title orders for refinancing. The economy is awesome right now. The rates are great.
Wow.
There's a lot of good programs out there. FHA, and basically anyone can qualify for FHA. 3.5 to I think 3.65 I saw today.
Wow.
That is an excellent rate, and you only have to put 3.5% down.
That's unbelievable.
3.5 down.
Yeah, compared to
Instead of putting 20% down and paying 5%,
double-digit
Yeah.
interest rates.
Oh, back then,
years
remember?
ago.
Oof.
Oh yeah, that was crazy. And,
Yeah.
but of course, the prices of the homes were lower.
A lot lower.
But it was still a higher interest rate that we had to bear.
This is an awesome time to be buying.
Yeah, I think so too. I think if people don't take advantage of it now, they'll really regret it for a while. Even if the prices come down a little bit, which I don't foresee.
No, I don't
happening.
foresee that too much. Not with the rates so good, they don't have to lower the prices.
Wow. Well, in closing, we got about a minute left. Lori, thank you very much for coming in today.
Oh, you're welcome.
If you you did a fantastic job, and of course, the law office of Glenn Andreoni always does a wonderful job with closing and good real estate advice. Would you like to give the audience the contact information
Yes,
for
sure.
the office?
So my name's Lori Donahue. I'm an attorney at Glenn Andreoni's office, 628 George Washington Highway. Our phone number is 401-334-4770. You can reach me on my cell phone, 401-578-8019, or email me, Lori, Lori, at rirealestatelaw.com. Thank you.
Excellent. Great job. Next week on our show, we're going to have a special guest, Paul Brunetti, who's involved in the home inspection business, and he'll give us some of the ins and outs about home inspections, what he looks for as a home inspector, and what he recommends his clients do in the inspection process. So, having said that, I thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next week. And again, my number is 401-265-6144. Thank you.